From the unexplained to the mundane, come join us on a journey to the fringe. Hello and welcome to Journey to the Fringe, where topics are ectopic. Huh? Not just a word for doctors anymore. We're taking it back. We are your learned hosts, Taylor and Chelsea, and today we're going to be looking at some weather conspiracies. This is a very large topic, and therefore we had to narrow it down to one specific thing, and that is HAARP. For those of you used to sitting in the hot tub that is conspiracy theories, I'm sure you've heard of HAARP before. For those of you who have not, first off, you should know that it's not spelt the way that you would think, but it's also, you probably know this because it's in the title of the episode, probably at this point. Now, Chelsea, you've heard of HAARP before, right?
Yes, like the instrument.
Sure.
Yep.
We'll go from there. Anyhow, it's going to be a restricted episode. I need to warn you up front. It's not going to look at everything just because it would be hours and hours of episode if I had to look at everything that could be attached to this. So we're just going to look at the weather side of it. We're going to look at a bit of history with HAARP, and then we're going to look at some of the conspiracies surrounding it and the people that are associated with those conspiracies. Chelsea, I would say strap yourself in, but I say leave yourself free. You need to be unstrapped for this stuff.
I'm strapped.
And we're going to go from here. Now, the weird thing is, we think of weather control conspiracies as kind of like a new age phenomenon. But if you think about it, these go back as far as humans can. Whether we're talking about dances to bring rain or sacrifices to the gods for good harvest, people have been trying to manipulate the weather in some way for thousands and thousands of years.
That makes sense. It's the most uncontrollable part of our life for the most part, other than other humans.
Yeah, and really, gods were all formed basically around weather, if you really think about it. And there's more recent ideas of it too, whether we're talking about James Espy, who in the 1830s proposed that moisture gets into the air through convection, so we should actually start forest fires to get rain. Or if we're talking about many attempts by the US to control hurricanes from the 1940s onwards, one of which was by dropping dry ice into the eye of a hurricane. Didn't work out so well. Or if we're talking about even in the Vietnam War, there was cloud seeding attempts to prolong the monsoon season so that they could flood the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
All very nice attempts.
That last one actually likely worked a little bit. It's controversial though, so it will be its own episode. And I don't want to focus too much on that. Before we go too far, yes, we do have ways that we do control the weather. We have been seeding clouds for decades, at least going back to the 1970s, either to prevent catastrophic rainfall or try to prevent it, or to actually try to induce rainfall. We've been doing that with planes.
What does that mean?
Basically just sending things into clouds to manipulate them, either to dissipate or to increase in volume so they can turn into rain clouds.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, if you remember, I believe there was cloud seeding that happened in the Chinese Olympics to basically make it so that it wasn't rainy during the Olympics.
I don't remember that because I never heard of it before.
Oh, okay. And yeah, insurance companies, I remember reading an article when I was taking an insurance program for my undergrad, and it was specifically about how we've been cloud seeding to avoid major storms in Alberta so that they didn't have to pay out as much in insurance. But anyhow, that has not much to do about this. What we're talking about is the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, known as HAARP, in this episode. And if you believe the scientific explanation and the government explanation, it in no way has anything to do with weather. I'm going to read this. This is right from its website. HAARP, which I'm going to call it from here on out, is a scientific endeavor aimed at studying properties and behaviors of the ionosphere. The ionosphere stretches roughly 50 to 400 miles above the Earth's surface, right at the edge of space, along with the neutral upper atmosphere. The ionosphere forms the boundary between Earth's lower atmosphere, where we live and breathe, and the vacuum of space. That comes from NASA. HAARP is the world's most capable high-power, high-frequency transmitter for the study of the ionosphere. And the HAARP program is committed to developing a world-class ionospheric research facility consisting of the ionospheric research instruments, a high-power transmitter facility operating in a high-frequency range, The IRI can be used to temporarily excite a limited area of the ionosphere for scientific study. It's a sophisticated suite of scientific or diagnostic instruments that can be used to observe the physical processes that occur in that excited region. Observation of the process resulting from the use of the IRI in a controlled manner will allow scientists to better understand processes that occur continuously under the natural simulation of the sun. Scientific instruments installed at the HAARP Observatory can also be used for a variety of continuing research efforts, which do not involve the use of the IRI but are strictly passive. These include ionospheric characterization, using satellite beacons, telescopic observation of the fine structure in the aurora, and the documentation of long-term variations in the ozone layer. That's what it's there for, according to
that sounds boring.
It sounds really boring.
Okay, good.
And it's in a really boring place. It's in the middle of nowhere, Alaska. Are you ready for it, Chelsea? Gacona, Alaska, which I've never heard of.
Oh, I thought everyone has. Just kidding. No, I've never heard
Part of the reason that it's up there is because it's studying the ionosphere. It needs to be in a place that gets the aurora borealis or the northern lights, because that's an excited part of the ionosphere. Ion meaning charged particle. That's where the charged particles are that they're studying.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And it gets really weird because the ionosphere is like one name for like 4 different layers of atmosphere, but we'll just call it the ionosphere from here on out.
Let's do that to avoid confusion, mostly in me.
So that's part of the reason it's in Alaska, is for that. There's actually like 6 factors I found for why they picked this specific location. And by they, I mean the government with the Air Force and the Army, along with the University of Alaska Fairbanks. We're looking at 1991 to 1993 it was constructed. So they did an environmental impact statement, which led to permission for an array of up to 180 antennas to be erected. HAARP was constructed at the previous site of an over-the-horizon radar, OTH installation. A large structure built to house the OTH now houses the HAARP control room, kitchens, and offices. Several other small structures house various instruments. And this was built in 3 distinct phases. The first one was the developmental prototype. It had 18 antenna elements that were put up in 3 columns by 6. Then there was the filled developmental prototype that had 48 antennas, and the final IRI. It was built with the final 180 antenna units organized in 15 columns by 12 rows. And sorry, I said Army. It was initially a jointly funded project from the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Navy, University of Alaska Fairbanks, and the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA. Which, whenever I hear DARPA, I always get it mixed up in my mind. I always think it's the Defense Against the Dark Arts from Harry Potter, but that's just a different group. Don't know why that's in my mind. It's not the same acronym or anything. But it's there, nonetheless.
I do like that one, though.
Their statement on why they built it was to analyze the ionosphere and to investigate ionospheric enhancement technologies, which that's where the shady shit comes from.
Oh, do they want to make the Northern Lights better?
They might. We'll get into that. Specifically, they explored the potential for developing technology to enhance radio communications and surveillance. And I think I'll end up talking about that part at the end, just because let's get into some of the exciting stuff and then get lame again.
Yeah, hold on. Aren't we worried about... No, maybe it's not related. That's a solar flare.
Solar flares do have charged particles, and that's why we get the northern lights. So they are studying that, and one of the things they are studying is the impact of solar particles and radiation on the ionosphere.
Because that can take down the grid, right? Is that why?
In theory, it could take down the grid. We'll see if we ever get to that point. It does have to do with what's going on in the ionosphere, and I think part of why we know so much about that is because of studying it.
With HAARP.
Partially with HAARP. I believe we knew about it before. A lot of it had to do with we exploded bombs in the atmosphere for a long time, and I think part of the research from that led us to realize that we can do some shit with the ionosphere.
Okay.
But not this episode.
That was the end of my question.
So, 1993, HAARP gets built, and Chelsea, I know we talk a lot of the niceties of Art Bell, but this can actually be traced back to a guest that Art Bell had on Coast to Coast AM in 1996.
They all can. I swear everything can be traced back to Art Bell.
And this is really the first time that HAARP conspiracies kind of hit the mainstream. This guy by the name of Nick Begich Jr. goes on Coast to Coast in 1996. He's going on to talk about his book. And what is the name of his book? It's one of those Really stupid. He had to have a pun in his title. Of course he did.
Everyone loves a good pun in a title. You're like, I can't remember the math. It's like 98% more likely to buy something or listen to it if it has a pun in it.
I just don't think that that's true. I think there's going to be a lot of people who get dad joke energies from it, and they're just going to avoid it. And in fact, maybe that's the exact group they're looking for with this, is only people who are willing to accept bad puns. Anyhow, his book, Dr. Nick Begich, I should say, is called Angels Don't Play This Harp. That is what he went on Coast to Coast AM to talk about.
This is a doctor, you say?
We'll get to that part.
That wants to be taken seriously, you say?
He goes on in 96, gets picked up immediately by everybody to the point of, in 2009, Jesse Ventura on his conspiracy theory show, I forget what it was called.
Oh, I forgot about him.
He ends up going to the gates at the HAARP facilities in 2009.
I remember
to investigate the rumors. And they basically said, like, because there's only like 2 people there. They're like, we can't have this entire film crew just show up and do things, so please go away.
Conspiracy theory with Jesse Ventura.
Okay, it was conspiracy theory with Jesse Ventura. In 2011, this gets built up even more when a Russian general told news media he suspected powerful American radars in Alaska caused the failure of Russia's Phobos Grunt Mars rover space mission, which I believe we talked about the Phobos missions before.
Yeah.
There's going to be a few things that come up that we've talked about before. And since this time, like, it just keeps growing, and HAARP's appeal to the reality challenge has only grown, and it shows up in so many conspiracies. Like, I'm trying to just keep this to weather modification, but it also shows up in chemtrails. It shows up in Bluebeam, which we talked about with the spiral.
Yeah, the Norway spiral.
And it shows up with 5G. It shows up with cell phone towers, targeted individuals. Even like the California wildfires and Australian wildfires get associated back to this. It's not just Jewish space lasers. It is HAARP that's doing this as well.
It's not just what space lasers?
Oh, there was a congressman in the US who, before she became part of the Congress, she blamed the California wildfires on Jewish space lasers.
Okay, you did say Jewish.
Yeah, very brief summary of it. It's not incorrect. It's just oversimplification. But she's more or less.
I was like, did I just hear the word Jewish space lasers? Okay.
But yeah, we're going to just focus on the weather control part of it. And this is an article written by Nick Begich on Dr. Nick Begich on his website, earthpulse.com. Chelsea, I want you to go to earthpulse.com now.
I'm not sure if I'm in the right place.
Yeah, it doesn't exist. I had to go on the Wayback Machine. This is from May 19th of 2011 on the Wayback Machine. This is talking about, basically, he's saying that there's no actual global warming or climate change, in that it is man-made because it's all HAARP. He does cite his sources. Chelsea, when we get to the sites, I'm going to tell you what the citation is, okay? And you'll be the judge of whether or not this is a good citation.
Is it the cult website?
It's not Falun Gong related at all. Don't worry about that. In fact, it might be good sources. We're going to see.
Okay. I have faith they're going to be good sources.
The High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, HAARP, based in Gokoma, Alaska, jointly managed by the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Navy, is part of the new generation of sophisticated weaponry under the U.S. Strategic Defense Initiative. Operated by the Air Force Research Laboratory's Space Vehicle Directorate, HAARP constitutes a system of powerful antennas capable of creating, quote, controlled local modification of the ionosphere, end quote. Scientist Dr. Nicholas Begich, actively involved in the public campaign against HAARP, describes HAARP as, and I don't know, it's right on his website. I don't know why he's citing himself as saying this. It's kind of weird. But, quote, a super powerful radio wave beaming technology that lifts areas of the ionosphere by focusing a beam and heating those areas. Electromagnetic waves then bounce back onto Earth and penetrate everything living and dead. And he cites this source from his book, The Military's Pandora Box. And it comes from Earth Pulse Press. It literally just says, like, Chelsea, I just need to share my screen for this because this is how he cites it. It's a direct quote he uses, and this is what it says. Nick Begich and Gene Manning, The Military Pandora's Box.
He's citing himself.
Doesn't tell you much, does it now?
No.
In fact, that's an incredibly lazy source, despite the fact that he wrote it. You think he could just go to where he wrote it.
They all look fairly lazy just from what I'm seeing from right here.
Yeah, so we're gonna keep reading and we'll go through that as we get to it. It's Dr. Rosalie Bertel depicts HAARP as, quote, a gigantic heater that can cause major disruption in the ionosphere, creating not just holes, but long incisions in the protective layer that keeps deadly radiation from bombarding the planet, end quote. That's a cited source, and it comes from Briar Patch, January 2000. That's a source. I don't fucking know what that means.
Briar Patch.
See Briar Patch, January 2000. Emphasis
What the hell is
added.
that?
Don't fucking
Emphasis
know.
added. Briar Patch.
Some of them have links you can click. They're dead links, but at least they have some links. But not that one.
Angled mass of prickly plants.
Yeah.
That's what Google says.
Anyhow, we'll keep going. HAARP has been presented to public opinion as a program of scientific and academic research. U.S. military documents seem to suggest, however, that HAARP's main objective is to, quote, exploit the ionosphere for Department of Defense purposes. Again, he cited the source, and it says quoted in Begich and Manning. So that's the last source.
He doesn't
That's
know how
his
to
book.
cite things. That's his book. Right.
Yeah, that's his book.
He's not a doctor, is he? Is he
We're going to talk about that later. Again.
Okay, there's no way he has any schooling if he's citing things like that.
Without explicitly referring to the HAARP program, a U.S. Air Force study points to the use of induced ionospheric modification as means of altering weather patterns as well as disrupting enemy communications and radar. Again, has cited his source, Air University of the U.S. Air Force AF 2025 final report. Doesn't give you any idea where it is. Just, it's in there somewhere. You gotta look.
In the university.
In their AF 2025 final report. And then he's got a link for it so you can go read it. It's a dead link. So, I don't know.
Nice. This guy's really good at what he does.
Yeah.
He seems successful.
According to Dr. Rosalie Bertel, HAARP is part of an integrated weapons system which has potentially devastating environmental consequences. Quote, it is related to 50 years of intensive and increasingly destructive programs to understand and control the upper atmosphere. It would be rash to not associate HAARP with the space laboratory construction which is separately being planned by the United States. HAARP is an integral part of a long history of space research and development of a deliberate military nature. The military implications of combining these projects is alarming. The ability of HAARP, Space Lab, rocket combination to deliver very large amounts of energy comparable to a nuclear bomb anywhere on Earth via laser and particle beams are frightening. The project is likely to be sold to the public as a space shield against incoming weapons, or for the more gullible, a device for repairing the ozone layer. I would like to also note, this is written at the latest 2011. We've had almost 15 years since this has been written. Have you noticed any of this stuff being sold to you, Chelsea?
Not once, I don't think, unless I missed
You haven't
it.
heard about the space shield that we've built? Or the ozone layer repair plan that we have?
Like I said, I could have missed it, but I don't think I have.
Anyhow, this comes from Rosalie Bertel, background of the HAARP program, November 5th, 1996. That's all I know about this direct quote.
No page, no, nothing more than that.
Nothing more.
Okay. So he's done his research, I see.
He has done his research.
Okay.
In addition to weather manipulation, HAARP has a number of related uses. Quote, HAARP could contribute to climate change by intensively bombarding the atmosphere with high-frequency rays. Returning low-frequency waves at high intensity could also affect people's brains, and effects on tectonic movements cannot be ruled out.
Mm-hmm.
Again, cited, that's from his book, The Military's Pandora Box.
I love that he's citing himself.
More generally, HAARP has the ability of modifying the world's electromagnetic field, and it is part of an arsenal of electronic weapons, which U.S. military research consider a gentler and kinder warfare. Again, cited source. This one's a little more in-depth, I guess. Don Herskovitz, Killing Them Softly, Journal of Electronic Defense, August 1993. According to Herskovitz, electronic warfare is defined by the U.S. Department of Defense as military action involving the use of electromagnetic energy. So that's actually slightly better. No page number. It's also in the Journal of Electronic Defense, which has published a range of articles on the application of electronic and electromagnetic military technologies. Which
that's his citing?
His citing is you should do the research. It seems like there's a lot here.
He cited, it's been published across all of these books, maybe, probably.
And especially it's in the Journal of Electronic Defense, which seems reputable, but I'm not going to read anything from it.
Trust me, it's there.
HAARP is part of the weapon arsenal of the New World Order. Didn't take long to get there. Under the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, from military command points in the US, entire national economies could potentially be destabilized through climatic manipulations. More importantly, the latter can be implemented without the knowledge of the enemy, at minimal cost, and without engaging military personnel and equipment as in a conventional war. The use of HAARP, if it were to be applied, could have potentially devastating impacts on the world's climate. Responding to US economic and strategic interests, it could be used to selectively modify climate in different parts of the world, resulting in the destabilization of agricultural and ecological systems. It is also worth noting that the US Department of Defense has allocated substantial resources to the development of intelligence and monitoring systems on weather changes. NASA and the Department of Defense's National Imagery and Mapping Agency, NEMA, are working on, quote, imagery for studies of flooding, erosion, landslide hazards, earthquakes, ecological zones, weather forecasts, and climate change, end quote, with data relayed from satellites. He does have a citation for this. It's Military Space, December 6, 1999. But I am going to take his word on that one, that they are studying weather from space, because NASA is very clear about that.
Like, at what point do you actually cite things if he's so vaguely referring to things? Do you think he just got a general idea from these places? Or, like, what's up with this?
I feel like he's a guy, and I watched a few YouTube videos from him. He has a ton of books, so he can't quite remember, like, he doesn't take notes, I don't think. I think he writes in stream of thought from things that he remembers. So he just goes back to vaguely where he remembers it from.
So, in your opinion, he may not even be getting it right.
No, he's not getting it right. He's using these out of context. Sorry, I can't say that because I haven't read the source that he's citing.
So when he writes something, does he put the little citation and then you refer back to it? Or are those just, like, at the end of the book?
They're at the end.
And he's just...
He's got it. He put the 6 there, and then you got to go to the bottom to see where the 6 is citing.
Okay, so he is citing particular thoughts.
Yes, and specific quotes too. But I have no idea where in those things that
this doesn't make sense. To me, it's that he has no official anything, and he's probably not a doctor.
Again, you need to stop saying that, because we're going to get to that later.
Is doctor spelt with a K?
According to the Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, signed at the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, quote, states have, in accordance with the Charter of the United States and the principle of international law, the responsibility to ensure the activities within their jurisdiction or control do not cause damage to the environment of other states or of areas beyond the limits of national jurisdiction. He's got a citation for that, but we're just going to skip over it and keep going. It is also worth recalling that an international convention ratified by the UN General Assembly in 1997 bans, quote, military or other hostile use of environmental modification techniques having widespread, long-lasting, or severe effects. End quote. Another citation. We're going to keep going. Both the US and the Soviet Union are signatories to the convention. The convention defines, quote, environmental modification techniques as referring to any technique for changing through deliberate manipulation of natural processes, the dynamics, composition, or structure of Earth, including its biota, lithosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere of outer space, end quote. Why then did the UN disregard the 1977 NMOD Convention BOS, as well as its own charter, decided to exclude from its agenda climatic change resulting from the military programs? In February 1998, responding to a report of Mrs. Maj Britt Theorin, a Swedish MEP and longtime peace advocate, the European Parliament's Committee on Foreign Affairs, Security and Defense Policy held public hearings in Brussels on the HAARP program. This is a citation. This is something that happened. I can tell you that. It's from... He cited it too. It's European Report, February 7th, 1998. The committee's motion for resolution submitted in the European Parliament, quote, considers HAARP, by virtue of its far-reaching impact on the environment, to be a global concern and calls for its legal, ecological, and ethical implications to be examined by an international independent body. The committee regrets the repeated refusal of the United States administration to give evidence to the public hearing into the environmental and public risks of the HAARP program, end quote. The committee's request to draw up a green paper on the environmental impacts of military activities, however, was casually dismissed on the grounds that European Commission lacks the required jurisdiction to delve into the links between the environment and defense. Brussels was anxious to avoid a showdown with Washington. And this is right from him. I love this. While there's no concrete evidence of HAARP having been used, scientific findings suggest that it is at present fully operational. He can't even find anything that says it's operational when it's very clearly out there. We'll get to that. What this means is that HAARP could potentially be applied by the US military to selectively modify the climate of a, quote, unfriendly nation or, quote, rogue state, end quote, with a view of destabilizing its national economy. Agricultural systems in both developed and developing countries are already in crises as a result of the New World Order's policies, including market deregulation, commodity dumping, etc. Amply documented. IMF and World Bank economic medicine imposed on the Third World and the countries of the former Soviet Union have largely contributed to the destabilization of domestic agriculture. In turn, the provisions of the World Trade Organization have developed the interests of a handful of Western agrobiotechs conglomerates in their quest to impose genetically modified seeds on farmers throughout the world, and its impact to understand the linkage between economic, strategic, and military process of the New World Order, and in the above context, climatic manipulation under the HAARP program, would inevitably exacerbate these changes by weakening national economies, destroying infrastructure, and potentially triggering the bankruptcy of farmers over vast areas. Surely, national governments and the United Nations should address the possible consequences of HAARP and other non-lethal weapons on climate change. And that's the end of his article. Even he doesn't seem to know what it is he's complaining about, and to be able to cite where these complaints are coming from, outside of that one thing with the European Parliament. I think that's a good summary of what these conspiracies can all be tied back to. Now, Chelsea, I would like to read to you Dr. Nick Begich's. It's from his About Us section on the Earth Pulse website.
I'm excited about this.
We're going to get this linked into another episode that we did that did actually focus on Alaska. Dr. Nick Begich is the eldest son of the late United States Congressman from Alaska, Nick Begich Sr., and political activist Peggy Begich. He is well known in Alaska for his own political activities. He was twice elected president of both the Alaska Federation of Teachers and the Anchorage Council of Education. He has been pursuing independent research in the sciences and politics most of his life. Begich received his Doctor of Medicine, Medicina Alternativa, honoris causa, for independent work in health political science from the Open International University for Complementary Medicine, Colombo, Sri Lanka in November 1994. So it's a Sri Lankan doctorate.
So that's where he learned to cite, eh?
That's clearly where he learned to cite. He has a medicine degree from Sri Lanka, so that's where he calls himself doctor. Has nothing to do with whether...
Do you think it was given in English?
I think so, mostly because of the honoris causa, which means it's an honorary degree. But he's still calling himself a doctor.
Doctor with a K.
Pretty much. Also, president of both the Alaska Federation of Teachers and the Anchorage Council of Education. Guy has no background in education. Doesn't have a teacher's degree. This is just somebody who's connected.
Okay, because that's where I was going with it. I was like, he must be a teacher.
This is just somebody who's connected in Alaska. So his dad was a congressman, famously died in a plane crash that gets attributed to the Alaskan Triangle.
What?
Yeah, his brother was a congressman, and his son, Nick Begich III, ran for Congress in 2022. I shouldn't say unfortunately. He lost, actually, to a very good candidate who is Native Alaskan. So she's actually a really good candidate from there. But very well off. His son had to disclose when he was running for Congress that he made between $1 and $5 million in the year he was running. And his campaign received donations from the company that published his dad's books, which I believe is also the dad's company.
Well, if he's putting out books with citations like this, it would have to be his own company.
It really would.
Okay. Interesting way to take your life if you're that well connected, but...
If you go look at his Coast to Coast page, he's been on consistently since 1996. His most recent appearance was in 2021. And he seems to have taken a shift just talking about HAARP to more of a new agey guy. Chelsea, I can send you here. One of his websites is thehiddenmonks.com.
Is that him?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, that's probably exactly what I expected, if I was gonna be honest with you. Register now. This is a free one-time broadcast. Experience happiness and fun.
His first episode on Coast to Coast AM, he really tries to get into the technicalities of like radio frequencies and the atmosphere. And even Art Bell was like, you need to dumb this down, man. Like, this is making no sense to even me, who's in radio, who understands how radios work.
Okay, so this is his new age stuff.
And that's what he's really moved to, because this takes a turn at this point. HAARP officially shut down as a government project in 2015 and was transferred exclusively over to the ownership of University of Alaska Fairbanks. Okay. They are incredibly open about everything HAARP. In fact, Chelsea, I'm just going to send you this link in chat so that you can see the website for HAARP.
Yeah, this looks official. Oh, is that a polar bear? That's so cute.
Yeah. And actually, they have merchandise you can buy that really leans into that. It's kind of a sketchy government spot. It's called Area 49, and it has like what can only be described as the Norway spiral behind an antenna.
Oh, that's cool.
And most importantly, Chelsea, do you see all the tabs you can click on the top?
Yeah.
Look at the top right one.
Submit experiment proposal.
So you can actually, I should put a caveat on here, so long as you're a physicist or a scientist, either with the government or in private practice, you can submit a experiment proposal to University of Alaska Fairbanks that uses HAARP. So if you really believe that you can manipulate the weather through HAARP and do all these other things like make earthquakes, which I didn't even really talk about in this episode, but you can just submit to Alaska to be able to use it to do this.
If we have anyone listening that can do that, if you're a physicist, which I assume we have many physicists.
I actually think that's almost exclusively who listens to us at this point.
I think you're right, based on our research. Please try it and get back to us with your study.
And they actually have a bit of a sales pitch on their website about all the things that they have there that like will help you do your research. And they do have research campaigns. You can look at all their past research campaigns. Also importantly, they now do have yearly open houses held at a particular time of year, so anybody in the public can just come see what's going on at HAARP.
Maybe we should let Jesse Ventura know. That's when he can show up.
And I think part of this is in response to that. They're like, hey, let's just make this open so that we don't need to worry about this again. It'll just be like 1 week a year where everybody can come. Oh, and Chelsea, I should say, I need to come back to this. It's part of Nick Begich's description of himself. Begich has served as an expert witness and speaker before the European Parliament. He was the expert on HAARP that they used in that report that they made.
Who else are you going to choose if you needed to?
The big part of this is that he is from Alaska. He has extra time on his hands because he's a rich kid from a very connected family. So he vaguely has an idea of these things, and he found a way to run rampant with it. Like, nobody knows about this, so they have to defer to him.
He was successful in that.
And at the time, this was a government project, so people weren't really talking about it.
Yeah.
But, and I said we'd get back to this. Oh, and Chelsea, sorry, I had to say one more thing from his description. Begich has published articles in science, politics, education, and is a well-known lecturer, having presented throughout the United States in 19 countries. So he has articles. He doesn't say published in journals. Literally just articles. And they're about science, politics, and education.
I mean, it isn't wrong.
As far as I can find, I couldn't find any actual like journal published articles that he has, mostly because I don't think it would stand up to any type of review, because man, does he not know how to cite sources.
I'd be interested to listen to his interview with Art Bell now. I'm going to look that up.
It was from December 1st, 1995. I really wanted to look into this just because I was curious, with climate change being as it is, why I haven't heard more about HAARP. But it still is in the background, and specifically whenever there's weather-related one-offs that seem to happen, HAARP gets brought up by particular people. The 2023 earthquakes in Turkey and Syria were thought to be part of Bluebeam and HAARP by some people.
Really?
And just in 2024, the Iowa caucus for the Republican primaries, Laura Loomer, who I hope you don't know who this is, Chelsea. She's a far-right grifter who attaches herself to things like InfoWars and the Trump campaign. I don't think she's QAnon, but she's pretty damn close. She posted an article about how it was Nikki Haley and HAARP created the blizzard which stopped people from going to the primary.
You know, I was just about to say, I haven't heard about HAARP or anything like that in a long time. And then apparently you just brought up a whole bunch.
And I think it's because it's more fallen into the QAnon stuff. And I think we both try to avoid the QAnon stuff just because it's so crazy.
You know what? It's past my time that I looked into all of this stuff. So I think the really out there things just go over my head now, unless I get particularly attracted into it by looking at something. But then I look at a summary of it and I'm like, oh, it's one of these.
Yeah.
I've done my time.
In November of 2016, 2 Georgia men were arrested on drug charges and reportedly plotting domestic terrorism at HAARP. Apparently they were plotting to destroy HAARP. So these conspiracy theories can have real impact on things happening. Despite the fact that like HAARP is just owned by a university and there's not much it's doing, it's still topics for people that are a little bit crazy, like we talked about with the infrastructure. It's not that protected, and if you can get there, it would be pretty easy to mess up. And
that's exactly what it just reminded me of.
I do need to bring it all back to that one thing that I said, that it was studying ionospheric enhancement technologies. One of the things that HAARP does is not only study the ionosphere, it can create a heated area in the ionosphere that's about 100 miles wide, which seems huge. But if you really think about it, that's teeny tiny in an area above the Earth, surface area wise. And what it basically does is it heats this area so that submarines can communicate with people on ground, because the low frequencies are able to bounce off it and subs need to use low frequency communication. And that's also why the Navy was involved in it initially.
All these things you didn't know. I didn't know. Interesting.
But that's where I'm going to leave it off. At some point in the future, we'll probably talk about a man by the name of Peter Kirby, the man who does not know what to do with his hands. Chelsea, I need you to go to peterkirby.com and just look at the About Me page.
And the About Me doesn't say I don't know what to do with my hands.
This is Peter Kirby. He combines chemtrails and HAARP. And yes, he does not know what to do with his hands. And that is his coast-to-coast biography picture as well.
I can't even with this pose. What the hell is that? I spelt this wrong. It's peterackerby.com.
Oh, okay. Peter Acker.
I'm gonna steal this pose.
This guy seems to lack any sort of social understandings. I've watched a few videos of him. I don't think the swastika right next to him is intentionally placed.
Oh no. Yep,
yeah.
dude. Oh god.
And this is also skipping out on another man who I think will end up getting his own episode, Kevin Martin, who is, this is directly from him, a quote, "I have Asperger's syndrome. You shit, so I'm gifted in only one subject. This is why I will always be better at weather than you. I have that disability, and I am known as the weather savant. You people can only study the subject, where I have that ability to understand it without studying it."
What's up with HAARP people?
Yeah. Anyhow, these people will get their own episodes in the future. For now, that's HAARP. It's studying the ionosphere. It was used as a giant antenna for communicating with submarines. It apparently can control the weather and leads to climate change. So it was a hard episode to do because you had to narrow it down. There are so many different ways it can go.
Yeah, that was great. That was a good way to...
Chelsea, anything you want to add before we finish off?
No, I can't get over this guy's pose. Wow. I feel very enlightened right now. Thank you for enlightening me.
You're welcome. And I have been Taylor, here with Chelsea. We are Journey to the Fringe. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
This guy.
Thank you for listening to Journey to the Fringe. If you have liked what you have listened to, please like, share, subscribe, or follow, depending on what venue you are listening to us through. Also, please, if possible, leave a 5-star review, as that really helps us in the algorithms. Should you wish to interact with us, please check us out on your social media of choice. I bet you we are there. And if you really want to communicate with us and give us ideas for new episodes, or tell us that we're wrong and terrible, either way, please send us an email at journeytothefringe@gmail.com. For now, I'll see you in the next episode.